Hey, good morning. Is anybody else tired? Yeah, tracks. Shout out to William for not reading Abraham. Anybody else notice he read Abram? And every single time I read Genesis 12, because it's before God changed his name from Abram to Abraham, every time I read Genesis 12, I'm like, the promises God made to Abraham. You nailed it. Great job getting that little detail right. It's actually a fun detail and a fun rabbit to chase. But not what we're going to do this morning. Welcome, everybody. Glad everyone's here. The singing, Tommy, thank you for leading that song. It's a really, really beautiful song. And I appreciate you calling us to focus on the message and the theme of your songs this morning. One quick thing before we get into the lesson. We've got this beast coming up as a church. Have you guys heard of it? It's called the Fall Festival. It's a monster. It's a lot of work. Tim is spearheading that for us, and it requires like everybody. It requires like all hands on deck because it's a huge event. It's a great event that we've done. Is this the fifth one? Fourth. We've done it 3 or 4 times so far, and it's always a really, really great evening. It's going to be November 8th, 7th, 8th, whichever one's the Saturday, the 8th. And it's going to be in the evening. And one of the things that has come of this every time we've done it is people who don't know anything about the church, people who don't care anything about the church, show up and meet the church. And when I say the church, I mean us. And every time that we have done this, God has allowed us to make connections with people who just live, right here, walking distance. He's allowed us to build some relationships with people, and he's allowed us to show people love. I remember the first year that we did it, people couldn't believe we were doing it for free. Well, in a really, 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 really small way, that's kind of what grace is. It's free. Okay, so we get a chance to love the community, to serve them in a way, and to just expose them a little bit to who Jesus is. It's a great event. And like we've said before, God does really big things with really little people, all right? Wildly inadequate, imperfect, and usually terrible people, God accomplishes a lot. And so this fall festival feels like a huge thing to us. In the grand scheme of things, it's a little tiny thing. But God has an affinity for those little broken things, and he seems to do great things with them. And so let's be praying about the Fall Festival, and let's find a thing we can sign up for. If you've got the availability, sign up and throw in. You can ask Tim what we need. You can check the bulletin, and you can ask me, but you know what I'm going to tell you? To go ask Tim. So listen, be praying for it, if nothing else, and try and sign up and take part where we can. It's always a lot of fun. Oh, and there's going to be a petting zoo. That's supposed to be for the kids, but I am thoroughly excited for that. So anyway, it's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be a really great activity. God's going to do great things with it like he always does. Let's jump in here with the lesson. Have you guys ever been having a conversation with someone? And throughout the conversation, you realize that maybe, I don't know, maybe it's about an event. You watched an event happen. Maybe you have both watched the same event, but you did not see the same things. Have you ever had this experience? I'm going to be honest. The most relatable version of this is when me and Courtney are having a disagreement. And I've said things, according to her, that have never come out of my mouth in that order. None of that, I don't know what conversation she was having. I also am self-aware enough to know she thought the same thing about me as I began to quote her. What conversation is he having? Sometimes we do this thing where we're all living in the same reality, and yet somehow we are living in different realities. Like there is a mismatch of the way we've understood or the way that we see reality. We can see the same thing in very, very different ways. Now, whole tangent here. sometimes that's a huge perk, okay? Sometimes that's a great blessing. Diversity of perspectives can build and sharpen iron. Like that's a really cool thing about our experience as humans and about the church. But sometimes it's infuriating, okay? Sometimes dealing with someone who is, we even have a phrase, they're not dealing in reality. Like, that can be a very frustrating thing. Now, here's the thing about Jesus. His view of reality is a bit wonky, if we're being honest about it. I mean, some of the things Jesus says, I feel like if we just take them at face value, feel remarkably untrue, like just plainly untrue. Paul quotes Jesus in Acts chapter 20, and he says that, remember the words of Jesus himself, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Apparently, Paul never celebrated Christmas. You know what I'm saying? Like, I remember hearing that my whole growing up and thinking, how does that make any sense? Because when you receive, you have more stuff. And when you give, you have less stuff. And in my understanding of reality and in my experience of reality, it just wasn't true. Like, it's just a lie. It's kind of like when you would get in trouble and your parents would say, this hurts me more than it hurts you. You remember that lie? It's just a different understanding of reality. Like, you would hear this and it would just be so contradictory to everything you know and have experienced. And sometimes Jesus says these kind of things, like it's more blessed to give than to receive. It's better to give away than to get. He also says this thing in Matthew chapter 5, and verse 43 starts the sentence, he starts the idea that you've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Why? like that's terrible advice. You think about this, you're just going to get taken advantage of, and it's just going to be a problem. Listen, sometimes when Jesus speaks, it feels like his view of reality is just plainly wrong and doesn't add up with what we've experienced. Just right before this, he talks about when someone strikes you on one cheek, you turn the other one and let them hit it too. Or you duck the next time. Or you run. Or you hit them back to make sure everyone knows that you're not the kind of person to be messed with. Like, there are a lot of ways to handle this, but just openly asking to get hit again, seems like the wrong choice. Jesus also says that if you want to live, you'll die, and if you want to die, you'll live. Okay, that's a bit of a summary of what he said. But look at Matthew chapter 16. In Matthew 16 and verse 24, it says, then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Listen, that just doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem like the reality that we live in. And I think what we do a lot of times is we settle this tension, we settle this uncomfortability by saying, well, Jesus is just talking about theology. Well, he's just talking spiritually, right? And we separate the reality that we live in which it is beneficial. This is the way we rationalize it. The reality we live in which it is beneficial to run or duck or hit back, from the spiritual reality in which it doesn't benefit you now, but in the future eternity, then it will benefit you. And we pull those apart. Here's my question. What if Jesus was just right? Right? Like we like to settle this tension by saying, well, it's a spiritual reality, and in actuality, like in our physical reality, these things would actually be the wrong choice. Loving your enemy is the wrong choice in reality. But in a spiritual reality, then that's the right choice. And that's what Jesus was doing. He was only talking about spiritual stuff. Here's my argument, or my question is, what if he's talking about both? Like, what if Jesus and his view of reality is not about just our spiritual lives or just this one aspect of us that doesn't really benefit us now but will benefit us in eternity? What if he's not only talking about that, but he's also talking about this reality as well? Just so you don't misunderstand what I'm saying, I think think Jesus is talking about our spiritual reality. I think that's absolutely true. I think he might also be talking about the reality we live in as well. But if he is, in fact, talking about this reality, then we're left with the idea that we should, in fact, get hit twice. That we should actually be praying for our enemies. That we actually somehow should find more satisfaction and joy in giving away our things than in getting our things. But what if he's right? Like, what if this is more than just theology or our spiritual reality? What if Jesus and his view of reality, his perception of the way the world works is just right, like just true? Like across the board, 100%, not spiritual, physical. What if it's just all the way true? What if he's the one looking at us saying, what reality are you living in? What if Jesus' view of reality is right? And here's my immediate question. Like, has anyone tested that theory yet? This is a little bit of a joke, but like, we like to settle our tension in our mind by saying spiritual, and we're right. And because that's a right thing that Jesus is doing, we don't have to deal with how it works in our actual reality, in our day-to-day life. But what if, and has anyone actually tested this theory that maybe the things Jesus are saying are truths about everyday reality and our spiritual reality? And here's the wild part. Yes, people have in fact tested this theory. I'm going to go on a side note and then connect it back. Do you remember the story about the guy who read Psalm 8, about the paths and the currents in the sea? You familiar with this story? If not, here it is really fast. You can go look this up, and I think Google will verify it. So there's a guy whose name I can't remember, but he was a oceanographer, and so he read in Psalm 8 about these paths and currents in the sea, which everyone had just always assumed was made up or poetic language, and it was. It's a psalm after all. But he was like, you know what? The Bible is right about these random details all the time. So if it says there are paths and currents in the sea, I'm going to go look for them. And he discovered what is now affectionately known as the EAC, dude. He found the East Australian Current, made popular by, well, you know, all the people who have used it for thousands of years to sail and stuff. But more recently made popular by Finding Nemo. Listen, he discovered that actually there are these paths and these currents in the sea. And knowing about them and discovering them was directly tied to his belief that even though the Bible wasn't specifically trying to give us scientific information, it was right. Okay? And so he just went looking and he found it. Well, there are people who, let me say it this way. There are people who would outright reject Jesus as the teacher of the truth and the Son of God, and they would reject almost every claim that we have about who Jesus is. And they tested his view of reality, and guess what? It works. You have probably read these tests, or you've probably studied this material. They're called self-help books. Have you guys read some of those? Have you read any books on leadership? There's a guy, his name is Simon Sinek. I know Donnie and I have talked about him before. He's brilliant. He is brilliant, but the things he says are just dripping with Jesus without Jesus. It's wild. He is one of the, he's a very prominent leadership expert, and companies will hire him to come in and do a seminar on how to lead and how to have a good company. And I mean, he's pretty well known at this point. And guess what he says about leadership? He says the first should be last. Well, actually, he doesn't say that. That would sound too much like Jesus. But the title of his book is Leaders Eat Last. Do we hear the similarities there? He also believes that the job of any good leader is to give of himself to the people he is leading. Servant leadership, is that familiar to anybody? The story of the Bible? Like it's all the stuff Jesus says. It's this very backwards, I'm the leader. I'm supposed to have power and authority. Don't you know that those who rule over you rule with authority? But it shall not be so among you in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus. Listen, this is the reality that Jesus claims to see. And people who don't care a lick about Jesus have somehow figured out he was right, not just in a spiritual way, but practically right now he was right. Other modern social sciences have discovered that anxiety and depression are directly tied to gratitude. Philippians 4 and verse 4 through 8 talk about you shouldn't be anxious, but instead you should pray with thanksgiving and let your requests be made known to God. I mean, it's modern social science written by Paul in ancient first century, where was he? Prison, when he wrote Philippians, right? Like it's there. The view of reality that the Bible and Jesus especially espouses is not just a spiritual thing. It is the way our world actually works. It is the view of reality that is the most true. Science and medicine have also found that forgiveness is directly tied to health. Wouldn't you know it, when Jesus was telling us to forgive, it was like really good for us and rooted in physiological reality that people who forgive have lower blood pressure, less heart disease, and preliminary studies link forgiveness to beating cancer. Like wild. Well, Jesus says you should forgive people, and that's right, apparently. Listen, what I'm really trying to say is when Jesus says something about reality, maybe it's true about reality. Maybe separating theology and spirituality from our physical day-to-day reality isn't the right choice. Jesus seems to think that all of it falls under the things that he says. Now, when we live out Jesus' reality, as seen by Simon Sinek, other leadership books that say that the fundamentals of a functioning society are sacrifice and selflessness, when we see that other people without Jesus are applying the reality that Jesus preaches, and what is the result of it, right? Like, have we tested it? And how has it come up? It's come up incredible. I mean, like, it's come up incredibly well. The results have been astoundingly good, okay? Living out the reality that Jesus preaches and teaches actually helps heal individuals of a lot, and also helps heal the society, or what we might call the world that we live in. And that's the truth that Jesus says without the Jesus. Let me make sure no one misunderstands what I'm saying here. Jesus is the most important part, okay? But truth is still truth. And when people take the truth that Jesus teaches, it still has an impact on the world. They're just missing the most important part, which is Jesus and his life and his sacrifice and how we're able to relate to God through that. So, living out Jesus' truth with Christ it saves the world. Like it fixes all the brokenness. No, I don't just mean the part of this that we always teach, which is our sin separates us from God, and if we follow Jesus and we trust in him through faith, paradigm of relationship like we talked about in class, then we can be, reconnected or reconciled to God, like Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, right? Like, that's absolutely true, but also, let me pitch this to you, okay? This is the offer. This is the offer that I think we could give people, the invitation that we can give to people. Imagine if someone came up to you, or if you came up to someone and said, hey, I have a new view of reality that will help heal what's broken inside of you. It will help mend relationships that you have in your life, and it will help make the world a better place. That's really good news. Tell me about that view of reality. This is the invitation or the offer that Jesus is laying out in front of us in the Sermon on the Mount. This is the way that Jesus teaches. His wonky views of reality are actually the way the world works. His view of reality heals what's broken inside of people. Yes, because of Jesus' blood, we're in a right relationship with God. But like Tommy mentioned, and like so many of the songs that we've sang, following Jesus can transform us into people that look more like him. It can heal us. Absolutely, our relationship with God is mended because of Jesus' blood, but living out the reality that Jesus sees mends relationships between me and my parents, or my kids, or my siblings, or my in-laws, or my boss, or my employees. Absolutely, absolutely. Jesus came, and because of his sacrifice, he saved the world from their sins so that the world is the world, meaning the people, doesn't have to die if they just follow him. That's absolutely 100% true. But also, right, spiritual, but also, forgiveness makes the world a better place. Grace and mercy and justice, living these out, makes the place you live more like heaven. Because in heaven, in the presence of God, who is love, you're making this small pocket of the world look more like the reality that is in heaven. Like Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. If someone offered you an invitation to a new view of reality that would help heal what's broken in you, mend your relationships, and save and heal the world and make it a better place, man, would that be good news? Like, of course. We would all be interested in hearing that. We would all want to know more about this. This is the invitation that Jesus offers us. It's the same invitation that God gives us to be a part of a movement that is doing this spiritually and physically right now. Let me tell you what I mean. Some of you guys have heard this before, and you could just say it with me if you want, okay? But in Genesis 1, when God created the earth and he made everything very good, he gave a particular creation a job of ruling over the world with him. It was humans. He said, rule over the world, have dominion over all of it. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. But then Adam, Eve, serpent, that whole debacle in chapter 3. Instead of ruling with God, Adam decided to try and rule on his own terms, right? Define good and evil for himself. Let me eat of the tree that gives me the knowledge of good and evil. Then I don't have to rely on God to tell me what's good and evil. And that devolves very quickly. Not only are God and man separated at that point and they're kicked out of the garden, but just 3 chapters later, everyone has decided that they get to decide what's good and evil in their own eyes. In chapter 6, it said that everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Truth had been decimated. No one had an objective standard of what was good and what was wrong. It was all relative, and everyone just did what they thought was right or wrong. And the world devolved into chaos, like really bad chaos. Like the whole world was full of violence. And the thoughts of man's hearts were only evil all the time. Genesis 6. Then it gets worse. After the flood, the Tower of Babel happens, and humans decide they're going to be their own God. They're going to build a tower up into the heavens. They're going to make a name for themselves. More rebellion against what God says is good. And so humans are separated from humans, and there's division among humanity. And then Genesis 12, the passage that William read for us this morning. God comes down to Abraham. See what I'm saying? It was Abram. all comes back around. God comes down to Abram and he says, hey, partner with me. We're going to fix the whole world. What do you mean? Like, he doesn't say exactly that language, right? He says, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Do you know what Paul says about that passage? So in Galatians 3, Paul says that was the gospel being preached to Abraham. That right there, that when God told Abraham in Genesis 12 that through Abraham all the nations of the earth will be blessed, that was God preaching the gospel to Abraham, which is a fascinating rabbit to chase. For right now, I just want you to understand, if the gospel is the way that God saves humanity, he was partnering with Abraham to make that happen, which means God said, hey, Abraham, you want to save the world? And then Abraham does all the same things that we just read about people doing from Genesis 3 to Genesis 12. He makes every single mistake. And then Isaac does every single thing wrong. And then Jacob makes a lot of the same mistakes. And then Joseph, and then Moses, and then Joshua, and then the judges, who are all horrible people. And then the kings, well, the judges, and then the prophets, kind of that like medium space in the middle where Eli and Samuel both have children who are terrible, terrible children. And then you have the kings. And then the kings are good, but bad, really, really bad. Like, objectively really bad people, repeatedly. Every time God tries to partner with somebody, they fail at it, and they do a terrible job. And instead of, this is actually like one of the main themes of the story of the Old Testament, instead of God's partnership and God's people being a blessing to all the nations, they actively bring curses on every nation they interact with. Right after God tells Abraham that he's going to be a blessing to all nations, Abraham takes off down to Egypt, and then he causes plagues to come on Egypt. It's the literal opposite of a blessing. Like when God's people have to move into the promised land, there's just decimation of all of these nations to get God's people into the promised land. When God partners with a king to rule over his people, there's wickedness and idolatry and oppression of the poor and the taking advantage of orphans and widows, like, happens over and over and over again. And these very people that are supposed to partner with God to make the world a better place are actively making the world a much, much worse place. Then this guy Jesus shows up. And he also is going to partner with God to save the world. Except he doesn't make any of the same mistakes as before. He has a view of reality that is in direct line with the creator of reality. He says, this is what God says, that it's better to give than to receive. Now, that's a silly example, but anyone over the age of 15, right? Like by 15, you figure that out, right? Anyone over the age of like 15 knows that is a true statement about actual reality. Anyone who's given, maybe this is the key, it's like hitting one good shot in golf. Anyone who's given one really good gift immediately knows it's way better to give than to receive. It's reality. That's how the world actually works. So then Jesus shows up and he starts spouting off this stuff about reality that's completely backwards to the way that people are living, to the experience you and I have. But he's right. And he lives it out. And it's borne out, his teaching is borne out for the next 2,000 years. That the way to life is through death. That the way to contentment is through gratitude. That the way to life, having life, is through forgiveness. That the way to treat your enemies is with love. And the way to retaliate is to get hit again. And the way to serve, or the way to lead, is to serve. Jesus shows up and he preaches a new view of reality that he didn't get for himself, like Abraham and Moses and Adam and Eve, but he got directly from the creator of reality. And this reality that Jesus is teaching promises hope for this life and the life to come. I got a new view of reality for you. In this understanding of our world, you can be fixed. You are good and you can be fixed. Your relationships can be mended and you can be connected to people again. Death isn't the end. That's the good news of the gospel. Now listen, is that every single part of the gospel? No, but we're picking one part to look at today, all right? We're looking at this part. The way Jesus views reality is true. Not true for situations, not relatively true. It is the truth of reality. And just like the guy who decided that a random psalm had a random line about paths and currents in the sea, and then he went out and he found out that it was true, I think we can take what Jesus says and test it. Because guess what? It's true. Real true. True right now, here in this life, and true in the life to come. It is not physical or spiritual. It is reality the way it was made by the Creator. And that's what Jesus offers us, is reality and life in that reality, a new way of seeing the world. And this is the invitation we get to offer other people. And I think it's kind of funny. There's a movie called Raya and the Last Dragon. Have y'all seen that one? It's a cute movie. I love this movie, right? It's a Disney movie, of course. And in the movie, one of the themes of the movie is trust. And how much trust should you give people? And can trusting fix the world? Question of the movie, okay? So at one point, they're trying to figure out how to, steal a really important thing that they need to save the world from the tribe that nobody trusts because they're the bad guys. And they come up with an idea we're going to go in there like ninjas and we'll sneak around and get it. And then another guy's like, how about this? And he's like, I'll just take everyone out and it's a joke, right? He's a kid, so he's not going to be able to do it. And then the leader or one of the leaders of the people, she's a dragon. Her name is Sisu, voiced by Awkwafina. Anyway, she is like, well, what if we just walk up to him and ask, hey, do you want to save the world? What if we just started asking people that? You know? Because you know what happens when you ask somebody, do you want to save the world? What's their answer? Nah, burn the whole thing down. How many people are going to give you that back? You might run into a rogue. It's not unheard of, okay? There's some crazy people. But listen, most people that you come into contact with on a daily basis are going to say, well, yeah, of course. Man, let me tell you about a way of seeing reality that actually does that, right? This is the invitation that we can actually extend to people and that we can extend right now. You want to partner with God the way that he does stuff? All the way back to Genesis 1 and then Genesis 12 and then every other person all throughout. You want to partner with God to rule the world? You want to partner with God to save the world? Do you guys want to make this world a better place? And do you want to go to heaven with a whole bunch of people? Is that what you want? Then let me tell you about a view of reality that brings that to life right now and in the life to come. That's the invitation that Jesus offered when he lived and when he taught. And it's the same invitation that God's offered all throughout history, and it's the invitation that we offer today. This is not a self-help sermon. This is not some sermon on leadership that teaches the truth that Jesus teaches without Jesus. This is the gospel, the good news that teaches the truth of reality as spoken by Jesus and is only impactful because of what Jesus did for us, dying on the cross, covering our sins in his blood, and being raised from the dead, defeating death, blazing a trail right through the grave so that we can follow him into eternal life. If that's something that you want, then, man, I'll talk about this all day. Just ask anybody. I always go too long. If you want this life, let me show you in the book what it says. Somebody will be up here to sit down with you. And if you need prayers of the church, man, that's why we have the church. That's why we have this reality. That's why the church isn't just a metaphor. That's why we're in reality in this building right now, because the reality that the Bible promises is true. We need people. And so if you need prayers of the church, or if you need to become a Christian, come forward now and we'll help you while we stand and sing.